So, welcome back to the second half of the beliefs and practices. I did not say this at the beginning, but you may have noticed that I did all the PowerPoints in green. Green is considered, this particular shade of green, more or less, is considered the sacred color of Islam. It's a color that's actually associated with Islam, so it's not that I chose it randomly. But anyway, back. So, just to sort of talk about the belief system. Now, there are different denominations of Islam, but some basic concepts about these Islam. Um, so, to kind of parallel it with what we've been doing. So, uh, God. So, they are an uncompromising monotheistic religion. They claim that to be the first religion to share monotheism, which is interesting. So they're Jews, they were monotheistic, but they didn't try and spread it to other people. Christianity, they do not. Our understanding of the incarnation of Jesus and the Trinity means that, as far as the Muslims are concerned, Christianity is not a true monotheism. So the true strict monotheism, in the minds of the Muslims, they're the first that bring this to the table for all people. So again, you'd understand the same kinds of things that we would claim for the Judeo-Christian God, all powerful, loving, and merciful. But again, more like the Jewish understanding that this God is immaterial and invisible, as in never incarnated, never comes into any sort of physical form. A lot of people, when I teach Islam, I just know that there are lots of things that people say about Islam that are very much inaccurate in our country. And Islam has a reputation for being unfortunate and accurate reputation for being aggressive and violent. But just to show you, this understanding, they really plug into that Judeo-Christian idea of a loving and merciful God. We get it from the Old Testament and Christianity. The Muslims get it from their Jewish neighbors. And God's love and compassion is much more a focus of the Quran, the sacred teachings of Islam, than God's wrath or vengeance. So, God then is the creator. And much like Judaism, then, a completely real, overwhelmingly good reality, the uncompromising moral universe. So I say that they get this out of Judaism. I think that there's a tendency in Christianity to pit the physical versus the spiritual. Let's see. And we can, I guess, thank the Gnostics and the Greeks for that. And so in Christianity, there's a tendency to denigrate or put down the physical aspects of who we are, and not spiritual, and to elevate the spiritual, which I think is a bad reading of Christianity, but Judaism and Islam together say that there is no difference. And so there's a sense of reveling and enjoying and focusing on this world in ways that Christianity tends to shy away from sometimes. And the nature of this world, very much like the Jewish understanding, is an uncompromising moral universe. So who are we in this? What are we supposed to be and do? Submit to Allah means a sense of absolute moral compass, driven by the Allah, and this sense that this is who we are. So they don't focus on salvation in the same way Christians do, but on the living out of the particular kind of life. So again, then, humanity, they don't have a concept of the fall. Now, obviously, there is a concept of sin, but not of the fall. And when I say not of the fall, of all humanity, right? So Christians read that story in Genesis as when Adam ate of the fruit, sin then is inherited by all of humanity. But the Quran, again, repeating some of these stories out of the Bible, Adam disobeyed and he repents and is forgiven. And that's very much so. Each one of us sin because we can forget our divine origin, but we don't have this need for salvation or atonement. So that idea of at one-ment, there is no need for salvation because that's not the way the world works. We go before God and we are forgiven. And so, at its best, there is no sense of for those of you who remember from Intro to Christianity or even if you've taken some advanced level classes, they totally, Augustine's understanding of original sin, that we're all born in sin, no way do they accept that. Calvin's understanding of the depravity of human beings, sunken sin, no, that is just totally against. So I'll cross it out, write it, and then I'll cross it out. No, no, no. So we are all good. So Islam then, as practiced through the 5 pillars, is all about then the sense of obligation to God, to Allah, and then to a certain way of living. So just to give you, and so the basic obligation of all humans, as far as the Muslims are concerned, is gratitude and following God. And so actually the word infidel, it means the one who lacks thankfulness. So I know it gets used a lot in TVs and movies and as, sort of a slur against non-believers. But I think that's another part of the bad propaganda. So again, it has a larger meaning. So, of course, and as far as a Muslim would be concerned, gratitude for life means understanding that Allah is the one true God. So that's to sort of the idea then of the word Islam meaning surrender or peace. If we are slaves of Allah, then we are free from all other forms of slavery, greed, anxiety, etc. And I've got to say that sounds a lot like some of Paul's language in his letters of the New Testament. We are servants of God, slaves of God, as Christians. So that language should not sound that strange. So our obligation is to serve God out of gratitude, to be thankful, and in the surrender we give up any control from any other elements that are not God. So humans. Then the Ummah. So I talked about how the move to Medina or Yathrib at that point is the moment that begins the Islamic calendar and the foundation of the Ummah or the community. So this is their understanding of them as a group or as a totality. They understand themselves in many ways, as Jews do, to be an example of to the nations of God's moral and social, this idea of moral and social justice, this high ethical, morally uncompromising universe there to be examples to the rest of the world. And you can see how Muhammad did that in his own lifetime in a world that was sort of really kind of the wild, wild west, to bring in and implement a very strong sense of justice. And that is not in any way, this is both we talk a lot about personal morals and ethics, but this is very much a community. One's ethical existence is lived out in community, and therefore, that's my little symbol, remember, for therefore, um, lived out in relationship with other people. So, the Ummah. To get be a little practical about it, the Ummah, there are personal rules in Islam that you probably may have heard of. So, no gambling, thieving, lying, eating of pork. So they have uh, their own version. There's an Islamic um, kosher regulations. They include uh, so no pork is definitely one of them, but also there is kashrut, just like you have special butchers. The animals and meat products must be handled in a certain way, just like the kosher laws. Um, or you cannot eat it. So that's the totality of theirs. No pork whatsoever, and then how the handling of the slaughtering and preparation of of any meat products. So use of intoxicants. So very much an issue. If you've been to an Islamic, most of them are dry countries and do not allow any alcohol or anything in them. And then sexual promiscuity. So that's the basic elements of the personal rules in a nutshell. And so I did, again, I've mentioned Huston Smith before. He's sort of the granddaddy of, of the study of world religions in the English speaking world. So I wanted to add this quote from him. So, pre and post Islamic Arabia, a comparable, whether history has ever witnessed a comparable moral advance among so many people in so short a time. Now, remember that Muhammad, Jesus had a relatively small number of followers. He was in a part of a larger Roman Empire. It took a couple hundred years for it to become legal. Buddha also, when you start with these individual figures, but remember that Muhammad was not just a religious leader, but he controlled in a vast territory that was only expanded by the four rightful caliphs. And so the change in society happened in a different way from the top down and much more quickly than in some of these other religions we've studied. So the moving on then to talk also about more elements of the Ummah. The Islamic tradition focuses a lot on economics. This world is very, very real, and money isn't something that is seen as sort of a necessary evil. It is very much a part of the world that they live in. And so, how did Muhammad and Islam change the economy of this region? And in some very significant ways. So again, unlike Judaism and Christianity, the attachment of Islam to certain what we would consider secular elements of our lives, just that distinction doesn't make sense to them, because this was so many of what we would consider secular issues are actually controlled by the Quran. So we've already talked about the idea of charity, but here's really interesting. Some of you may know what primogeniture means. Primogeniture means that and if you have any English ancestry, they also practiced primogeniture. The oldest son was the sole heir, which meant all the rest of the children got nothing. There was obviously a lot of family obligations where the siblings were supposed to be protected, etc. But under Islamic law, primogeniture is no longer allowed. An inheritance is shared among all the children. So basically, the oldest son gets the largest percent, a certain percent. Um, the rest of the, and then, again, you could figure out the math equation for this. Other sons get the same percent. So, and then, but this is really, really radical, that any daughter, so whatever percentage goes to the oldest, what's left over is divided, whatever percentage, equal percentage to each son, and whatever goes to a son, 1/2 is given to the daughter. So that's really just a kind of, you think about, for those of us who are of European ancestry in the 700s to 800s, it hasn't been that long since women were considered property themselves in other parts of the world. And I'll address this again later on. The role of women in Islam is not good right now, but that is not because of the religion itself. And it's an interpretation. This, of course, today we'd say they should all be divided equally, but this was a radical move. And so the idea that the religion controls one's money and makes demands or obligations of one's money in ways that Christianity and Judaism don't. And so I wanted to start down here. They don't object to profit, economic competition, being an entrepreneur. There is nothing wrong with being wealthy. And let's face it, there is a sense of ambiguity about wealth in the Christian tradition, some aspects of it. But Islam would say there's nothing wrong with acquiring wealth. You just need to practice economic justice and fair play. And so this idea of the blood analogy is really central. So as the idea of how the economy is understood like a human body, and blood must flow through the body for all parts of the body to be healthy, right? So you can't tie something around your wrist and cut off the circulation, or your hand would die, right? And so the rules of Islam focus not on making sure that everybody is equal necessarily, but that money and wealth and the things, the economy flows in a healthy way to all people. So in a sense, one can see that pillar of charity as a way to annually redistribute. But again, sort of this a very different understanding of money. So, and of course, along with that is an equal access to justice. Money can't buy better access. So you can be wealthy as long as you are morally doing it in a morally acceptable way, as long as you're giving to charity, as long as you're making sure that you practice fair play, and that all members of society, that no member of society is being shunted off and literally being cut off to die. So this idea of the blood analogy. So I think that I'll stop here.